So hey guys, welcome everyone to Code Week of Kurius, Day 1, Web Development. So hello, I'll be your workshop presenter today. So I'm Leo Tian, and I'm just a high school student who really loves coding in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm sure you guys will have a lot of fun too learning this. So as you can see from the title, what we're learning right now is beginner web development, and we're really just starting with the basics like HTML and CSS. So you've probably heard of HTML. What exactly is it? So what HTML stands for is Hypertext Markup Language, and this is meant to be a language that is read by computers to display websites, and it's one of the core technologies of the World Wide Web. And because it's written in kind of a special syntax called XML, it's also meant to be recognized by humans and computers. So compared to some other languages, you're going to find HTML really easy to read and really structured. So what HTML is meant to do is that it provides a framework that other technologies like CSS and JavaScript can build off of. So it's going to be very basic, and it'll need the other technologies to really get your website to look good. And moving on, let's just open up an IDE here. For the purposes of this workshop, I'll be using VS Code. So to add a file, you can just click this tiny button up here. And then usually the standard name for just a beginner or just a beginning HTML file will be called index.html. And you'll see that there's this tiny symbol here. Once you click it, that'll create an HTML file for you. And if you open the repository or the file that it is in, you'll see that, yay, we have a new file. And right now, because the HTML is empty, you're going to see that it doesn't show anything. It's just a blank screen. VS Code has this very convenient function for you in that if you click the exclamation mark, you'll see that it's an Emmet abbreviation for just the beginnings of an HTML document. And delving into the structure of HTML, you're going to see that first of all, you're going to see the HTML tag, and then you're going to see the head and the body. So I'll just give a brief description on what each of these does. So the head, what it really does is it holds relevant info for accessibility, and it helps with website searches, such as when you go on Google. And it also holds information like the site author and the title of the site. For this, it's just called document right now. You can see in the title tag, and let's just call this workshop for now. And what the body tag is really meant to do is that it's meant to hold all the content of your HTML page, and most of your coding, at least in HTML, is going to be here. And the general structure of HTML is that it's going to have tags like this, with a starting tag and an ending tag. So the starting tag will have two angle brackets around it, and the ending tag will be mostly the same, except there's a slash here. And what this does is that it surrounds the content that it holds. And this is what is known as the document object model. So everything is going to be nested within each other, and it's just going to be kind of like a tree or a structure of all the elements that you're going to see in HTML. And that technical knowledge aside, let's get started. So the main point of HTML is just going to be building UI. And one of the most common elements that you're probably going to find in HTML, and the first one that most people learn, is going to be the header elements. So there's a lot of different headers, for instance, header 1 or heading 1. And doing this, we can type some text in there, like hello world. And we can save the file. And on reloading this page, we will find that the page now says hello world. That's cool, right? And you can actually build upon this. So the header is usually used for titles in websites. So let's say you have a landing page, and when you get in, it's going to say, oh, we are this organization. And it's going to be really big text. So that is going to be a heading 1. And there's also other headings heading 2, for example. That's meant to be kind of a subtitle. For, say, a blog page, you're going to have the title at the top and then tiny little sections. So, as you may expect, if I say section 1.1, right. Yep, that reloaded there. So now it says section 1.1, and you're going to see that this is a little smaller than heading 1. And this actually goes down all the way. So you can do H3, 1.1.1, and H4. It's just really convenient that you don't have to style everything, as we'll go into later on. And when I reload this page, you'll see that it eventually gets smaller. And the thing about heading tags is that it actually realistically only goes down to H6. Anything beyond that is not in HTML. So that's just a thing to keep in mind when you're building your website. And another common element you're really going to see in HTML is the paragraph element. And of course, you know what that does. It literally sounds like what it is. So this is just denoted by a P, and I say hello again. And this is what's really going to be holding most of the content of your site. Say you have a blog, most of that content is going to be written in paragraphs. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm moving on to some other elements. So say we said, let's just do another P tag. We said, no, this blog is made by Leo Tian. We're looking at this. We're like, I don't want this. This looks too long. I want a line break right in the middle there. So, of course, as you may expect, there's actually an element for that, and that is the line break element, which is BR. And you'll notice that this element is not the same as any other ones in that most others have a starting tag and an ending tag. But this one really only needs itself. You're not going to put anything inside of a line break. So this can just, stay there. It's happy. But in some other languages for coding websites, say XHTML, you're going to have to put that slash there. But for HTML5, that won't be necessary. And if I reload, wow, it's now separated. And you're going to notice something in that when I have a line break, it's going to be different from just having paragraphs. So this is a paragraph, and this is a paragraph. You notice that there's a spacing here. And that's because there's something known as the margin, and you're going to come into contact with that later. And just as a showcase of when to use the BR tag and when to not use the BR tag, so say you have one sentence and you want to break that up, use a BR tag, that's fine. But in general, if you have multiple paragraphs, you're going to put those in multiple paragraph tags. Don't shove BR in places that it's not supposed to be. And of course, one thing that you'll probably want in your site is images. So how do we add that? Well, of course, there's a tag for that as well. And it's going to be called the image tag, and it's abbreviated like IMG. When you type that in, VS Code is going to automatically show you some of the fields that you probably want to put in, but that might not be the case. So there is the source. There's the source property, and there's also the alt. So what does this mean? So the source just means where it's going to get its image from, and alt is going to mean, okay, if the image is broken and it doesn't display, what is it going to say instead? And for the general purposes of accessibility, this tag is pretty important as well. It's just equally important as your image. So let's just, find a little picture, and it turns out that I have one here. So let's just type this out. Yes, it's a picture of me. And we can write source. So you can just add the path to that file. And for here, it's just going to be leotian.png. But say if it's in a folder that says graphics, you're going to have to tell your program how to navigate into that file. So you're probably going to do graphics / leotian, and that's going to tell your computer exactly where that file is. So we can reload this page, save and reload. Hey, now we've added an image. Easy enough, right? So now that we have our graphics going, another thing that you're going to see really commonly in sites is a hyperlink. Should add that as well. So yeah, so hyperlink is basically just the link that leads you to another page. And we can do that by adding what is known as an A tag or an anchor tag. So let's just make another paragraph and say, hey, look, here is something that I want to show you. And say I want the word here to lead me to my personal site. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an A tag or an anchor tag. And a property here that you're probably going to want to type is href, which is basically stands for the URL that you want to lead the user to. So say I want to lead it to an external web page that already exists and is hosted, then I would type https personal site 417.repl.co. And you just have to fill in here. And please notice that you can fit elements within other elements, and that's really why HTML is so beautiful, because it's all nested within each other. And we can just save, and we'll see that, hey look, there's a link. And when you click it, it's going to lead you to another web page. So by doing this, you can start to build more complex sites where one file leads to another and another and another. And just going back, and if you don't want to target, say, a website that's already on the internet, and instead you want to target another file, that's fine as well. So I'll just show an example here. Let's create another file and call it blog.html. Drag that out. Yes, move. And we just start another file, and we say h1, this is Leo's blog. We reload, and we click this. Oh, we didn't add this. And we can link this to blog.html, and you'll see that it already shows. Just enter, reload the page, and click here. It's going to lead to that other HTML file. And the same goes for if it was in a folder, you would just add the name of the folder's / and then the HTML file. And those are really just, the general, really basic elements in HTML. And you're probably also going to see some other common elements like the list elements. So when you want to have a bullet list of, say, things that I like. And what we can do here is we can actually add the UL element, which is also called an unordered list. And then inside of those, we're going to have what is known as LI, which is a list item. So we can ask things that Leo likes. Coding. Volunteering. I also like reading. And if we save and we reload the page, you're going to see that it loads a bulletin list like this. And of course, if you want it numbered, you can use OL instead, which is an ordered list. And say we redo that, and you're going to see that's now listed in 1, 2, and 3. So that's all really the basic elements of HTML. There's going to be a lot more to that you're going to explore by yourself later on. But right now, this website really doesn't look great. It's just text, an image, text, a link, more text. And obviously, if you hand in a personal site like this, nobody's going to really want to look at it. So now we're going to introduce a really powerful tool that is known as CSS. So, what is CSS? CSS is known as cascading style sheets. So what it's used for is it's used for styling HTML elements to add, say, color or margins and height, width, and all that cool stuff. And cascading just basically means it rolls down. It rolls down all the HTML elements. So what that means is that the parent elements are going to affect the child, but the child elements aren't going to affect the parents. And I'm going to show you what that really means later on. So the child is the element inside the tag, and the parent is the tag that an element is in, with live examples coming up. So CSS is a very powerful tool because it can also kind of change the arrangements of HTML elements, and also it transforms boring, bland sites like what we just coded into an absolute masterpiece. Although that's probably not going to be a one-step process. It's going to take a lot of work. So, heading back to our file. Now, how do we add CSS? There's actually 3 ways of doing this. So the first way is known as inline CSS, where what you're going to do is basically, oh, I want to style the H1 element, and I'm just going to write this. So it has the style, give the style property, and I want the color to be red. And if we reload the page, whoa, the color is different now. But really, that's not usually how we write CSS. We usually do it in one of the 2 other ways. So the other way is writing it in the head, doing it in what is known as a style tag. So basically, you can write CSS in here, and it's going to be slightly different than if you just directly write it into an HTML element. So you're going to target an HTML element by writing the name of that tag. So say we want to target the heading, which is H1. And then that's going to be followed by curly braces. And you can write whatever you would normally write inside. And how you would write each property, such as color, was you have the name of that property, you would have the colon, and you would have the value that you want to give it. So in this case, red. And make sure you add the semicolon at the end, or else that may cause some bugs later on, such as when I have 2 things. That's going to break your code. So remember to add that, and you will see that it does the exact same thing. Although I would like to note, if I have 2 of these tags, it will target all H1s. Whereas if I put this in the style here, color red, and I delete this, it's only going to target one of them. So writing it inside is going to be very specific. But if you write your CSS in the same place that you write your HTML, that's obviously going to end up being very, very messy. So the last way of writing CSS, which we will continue to do for the rest of this workshop, is to put it in a link. So the relationship that the CSS has with this HTML page is it's a style sheet. And the href is where href is just where you would type the name of that file. So say we call this index.css. And we can just type in index.css here. You will see that when I target h1s, this time let's change it up a bit, make it blue. You'll see that it does its job. So, writing CSS here is great, but what if I have two of these and I only want one of them to be blue? So, this is red. That's not good. It's not supposed to be blue. So to target specific HTML elements, what you can use is class. And let's say I give this class name of blue. And to target that in the CSS file, you just write a period blue. Actually, no. That's wrong. It's red. And so dot red, that'll target the red class. Give it a color of red. Now it's red. So there's going to be a few things that you need to keep in mind. The reason that it's red instead of blue when I define both of them is because a class has higher priority than just a general tag. And say you only have one thing that you know you're probably going to have just one of them, you can also use ID. And let's give this an ID of aqua. And how to denote ID is just using a hashtag aqua. And I can give it, this time, a background color of aqua. And you're going to see that this works as well. And just to keep in mind that the ID tag has higher priority than the class. And there's also a lot of other properties that you might want to use in your CSS. So I don't want this to be on a line on the left. I want it to be at the center. Then what I could do is h1 text align center. And that would basically put all this text in the center. And you could also adjust things like font size. So I want red to be slightly smaller. So font size, maybe like 24 pixels, which is a unit of measurement in HTML and CSS, and that's going to make that smaller. So, now that we know how to target elements, let's say I want my name to be green because I love green. So, okay, this is a P. I'm going to put the class to be green. Of course, you can name these things however you want. It doesn't have to correspond with the color. But green, give it a color of green. And I want my name. Oh, that's not my name. The entire thing is now green. So one thing you can do about that is to add what is known as a span. So instead, if we use a span here, and just rewrite my name in there again. So we give this a class of green again. You'll see that only my name is green. And maybe you're thinking, wait, why are we using spans? Why are we not using another P element? Well, with the BR here, it's not going to be so obvious, but say if I just wanted this to be in one line, with a span, it remains in one line. But with a P, with a paragraph tag, it's going to break it up into two. And that's not really what we want sometimes. So a span is what is known as an inline element. An inline element just, takes as little space as possible. Whereas something like a paragraph tag or an H1 tag is going to take up as much space as possible. So it's going to span, in this case, the whole width of the screen. And say, yeah, this part is not very fun. I want to make the background of all of this to be like a light blue color. Then what we could do here is we can add a div. So div tag is going to be just like a span in that it really does nothing by itself, but it's used to contain other content. And the difference is that a div is a block element. It will expand to fill the entire space. So that'll be made apparent if I say, I'm going to make all divs have a background color of Alice blue, say. And you're going to see that there's a slightly different color, which I'm probably going to make that a little more apparent by just changing the color. You'll see that the entirety of this will be that nice blue color. And just moving on from there, there's also a lot of other attributes that you might want to consider. So one of the good ones is height and width. And you can really use that for anything, but in this case, I'll use it for our image, which we called aqua. So let's say we want the width to be, 250 pixels. And we want the height to be like something wacky, like 400 pixels. That's going to put it totally out of proportions. But you can see that changes the dimensions of the picture. And I'll just put this back to 250. So it's kind of a square shape, although it is a bit squished. And one of the things that are really useful is the margin tag. So, this text is too close to the side of the page. I don't like that. One of the things you could do is give that text, just say all paragraph elements, what is known as a margin. So a margin is basically spacing between an element and its container or other elements around it. So I want to give this a margin of, say, 30 pixels. And you're going to see that all the elements are pushed to the right like that. And you can also target specific parts of an element. So say you want only the left side. You can do margin left. If you want the top, you can do margin top. But here we'll just keep it margin. It's like that. And another very interesting interesting property is padding. So I want this div. I want the text inside this div to move, a bit to the right as well. So what I might do is I might add margin, and you'd think that would work. Say 50 pixels. But that pushes the entire thing. And even when I do margin left, you'll see that it pushes the div and not the stuff inside it. And of course you can just target the elements inside it with a margin, but one of the more interesting things you can do is instead adding a padding. So basically you can think of an element as having kind of an invisible box around it, and margin would be adding space outside that box, whereas padding would add space inside the box. And we can achieve some very cool things with this. Like we can just give it, a padding of 25, and that would put space all around the element inside the div. And of course, there's also a border. So we can give this a border of 1 pixel, which is again a measurement of length, and solid, which is a type of that, like that line that you might want, and we maybe want it to be gray. So you'll see here that this adds gray outline to that box. Another very cool property that you can add is border radius. And that's going to basically round out the corners of any element you're putting it on. So say we want a 10 pixel border radius. And when I reload this, you'll see that it's slightly ever so rounded now. And of course, you can change that value to suit your own needs. But another interesting thing about this is that you can actually put it on an element that's wholly square, and say I want to have a border radius of 50%. So that's basically going to round off the entire thing into a circle. And obviously, this is not all of HTML and CSS, but this is going to be the end of the workshop. So there's going to be a lot of good HTML and CSS resources like W3 Schools or freecodecamp.org, which is going to help really teach you mostly everything about HTML and CSS. And W3 Schools is just a really good general resource for, if you forget something, search it up. But you can also browse through it to learn all about all the HTML and CSS elements and properties. And freecodecamp.org really provides a more streamlined process where you learn all this stuff. And here's some topics that you might want to explore in your learning. So maybe some HTML elements like input forms and tables, which will really improve the structure of your site, as well as things like semantic elements, which helps browsers understand which each section of your website is for. And for CSS, I would just encourage you to look for other really useful properties. And maybe another thing to look at, if you're good enough at CSS, just look at CSS Flexbox, which will help you reorganize the structure of your site. And again, just look at these two resources. They're really fun. It's really fun to learn from. Before we end this workshop, let's quickly talk about the Web Dev Beginner Challenge. First of all, what are challenges? Challenges in Kurius Code Week are a group of fun activities where you can really practice the skills that you have learned in the workshops. And make sure that you check those out, because if you do all of them, and if you hand in them early, you might be able to win prizes. So, let's go into the challenge details. Our challenge here is for you to build your own personal portfolio site on an online IDE. And make sure you use all the skills that were taught in the workshop. But also make sure that you take the extra time to learn HTML and CSS by yourself, and learn just new and fun elements or properties. And make sure to incorporate those features onto your site as well. Submission details will be posted on the server, so make sure that you check these challenges out. Thank you, and have a nice day.